Hello, hello. Welcome back. Those who are watching, listening, Superpower Alliance. I'm so excited because today I have my good friend and best-selling New York Times best-selling author of 5 books. I'm reading because I don't want to mess it up. Of 5 books on sports history and social justice. Really cool intersection there. Nonfiction books for teens and adults. Andrew Maraniss. Yay, I'm so glad you're here.
Yeah, Kelly, thank you so much. We've been talking about this for a while, and it was fun to look on the calendar and say, oh, today's the day. So really looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, same. And I told you just before recording that this is kind of a selfish agenda for me because I want to talk to you about this anyways. And so hopefully some of my questions are also going to be questions that our audience will be interested in as well.
All right.
But just to get us started, I sent you this question ahead of time so that you wouldn't be too like, what are you asking me?
Yeah.
Always start these with what is your superpower? And for those of you that are tuning in for the first time, a superpower is not like your shiny skill, the thing that you know that you're like, ooh, this is what I do best, but it's more something that maybe you would have hidden or not been so proud of, but by incorporating it or integrating it actually informs your work. And so it's a superpower. So how would you answer that?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you gave that like explanation of what you mean by it. And when you emailed me the question, you gave an example, of what you consider your superpower. And it was really interesting for me to think about, because I definitely do not think of myself as having any sort of cool superpower like that makes me special or anything. But in thinking about an aspect of my personality that maybe I don't always or I haven't always considered to be the most like positive or the best memories of my life or anything, but that has actually turned out to work for me, I think is a sense of being an outsider, and I think that was developed. I don't know if I'm psychoanalyzing myself, but we moved around a lot when I was a kid. Um, I think 7 different states by the time I was in second or third grade, and so I was always a new kid at school at a young age. And a couple of those times it was even in the middle of the school year, or I know we moved in first grade with like a month left in the school year, and so it wasn't like it was well planned, a lot of thought put into it. My parents were very young when I was a kid. So um, always being the new kid and feeling that sense of loneliness at school, or looking around and seeing the other kids with friends and wondering like, well, next year maybe I'll be friends with those people, or I'll have somebody to sit with at lunch, or I don't know. All of that feeling that has remained with me even as I've become more comfortable, and I've lived in Nashville now for 30 plus years. So I don't consider myself an outsider
Mhm.
here necessarily, but maintain that sensibility, and I think it has given me added empathy for other people um, who might be dealing with any sort of sense of outsiderness, and also it always gave me an excuse to ask questions because I was also interested in journalism, and so I could be the new kid in high school, which we moved before my sophomore year of high school from Washington, D.C. to Texas, which was huge culture shock.
Mhm.
But I was sports editor of our high school newspaper. And so maybe I didn't necessarily know people already, but I had an excuse to interview them for an article. And so it allowed me in kind of a less pressure or less social anxiety type of way to learn about new people, and to ask them questions and get to know them. And it was so in combining those things has helped me as an author also, because I'm writing about people who have lived very different experiences from mine, but I'm focusing on people who have been typically discriminated against for one reason or another, who have been treated like outsiders too. But then that aspect of wanting to hear those stories and asking questions as a way to get to know people have really combined to help me, I think, as an author. And so that's what I thought about as the superpower, the way you define it.
I love that answer. And actually, it's as you're talking, I'm thinking, how did I not know this about you? I mean, our families have been getting together for years. Like we've watched our kids, grow up together. They're not totally grown up, but like it
Yes.
feels like it from when, if you look at pictures when they were just babies together. And I just had no idea. I had no idea that you moved around that much, that you felt like an outsider. And it makes so much sense, even in like how it informs your work. And of course, it's such an advantage because that, both the empathy and then the curiosity
Right.
that you bring to your interviews, and even the subject, the sort of where your passion lies. And I know like the sports part, like that's the part that like I can't really relate to, and that's where you and my husband get along really well. But the inner, I just love that intersection. And so just kind of having that backstory about you is, yeah, it's like I want to have a whole conversation just about, but
Yeah.
I appreciate you thinking about that. Oh, there's Winnie. Do you hear her?
Hey, Winnie.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
should.
I mean that sense it has helped me, I think, as an author. It hasn't always helped me just as a human being,
Yeah.
although I think it has also. I mean, there's been pros and cons to it. But it's undeniable part of like what makes me who I am.
Yeah, yeah. I just think that's important to even articulate, you know? So,
Hmm.
okay, so we're basically our kind of the point of us talking together is to talk about, because you have so much experience and I really do respect you as an author, and the type of, you're a very thoughtful author, like the research, just the time and energy. And I think I've watched you grow and you've had to become super disciplined, just kind of turning these books around with your publisher. So just
Hmm.
the whole process is fascinating to me. And this is where I know that there's a lot of, so the audience that we're talking to are therapists. And, whenever you get to a place where you're an expert in a field, there is sort of this natural opportunity to either speak or write, or like kind of as another way of speaking to an audience, right?
Hmm.
So people who are listening are, maybe interested in writing a book themselves, for whatever reason. Sometimes it's just like, I just have a book in me and I want to, like a bucket list, like a life bucket list type of things. Other times it's more of a strategy um,
Right.
as part of, their business or their work. But so this first question, I'm very aware that there's the writing the book and then there's getting published. And
Hmm.
for the sake of the conversation, I think I'm going to separate it in the beginning, right? And if just the writing, so if you imagine someone who's wants to write, but is staring at a blank page, and because I know you've done this so many times, but just getting started, um, what helps you? And maybe what advice would you give to new authors or beginning
Yeah.
authors?
Okay. Yeah, and there's so many aspects to getting started even, like
Yeah,
there's the aspect where you're staring at that blank page, maybe after you have a sense of what you're going to write about, but you just literally can't get started. There's
yeah,
also the place of wanting to write a book, but not necessarily knowing what that book is yet, and like, how do you figure that out? What's the story you want to tell? What's the story you want to tell that you believe other people will buy and will actually be published? Those aren't always the same thing either.
yeah,
Um, like for me, before my first book, I just declared that I wanted to write a book. And my father-in-law, who was my future father-in-law at that point, said, "Well, what do you want to write a book about?" And that stumped me, which seems like a ridiculous thing to have happen, like to declare you're going to write a book and not even have the idea yet. But I think that is part of it. You have to decide you want to do it, and that's going to require, like you said, discipline. personal discipline to spend the time that's necessary to do it. And there will be sacrifices along the way, because it takes a lot of time, and so that might take time away from your regular job or your family or whatever you do with your free time if you have it,
Right.
or getting up earlier or spending your weekends a different way, so that's a big aspect of it. The other thing I would say is you have to be really passionate about what you're writing about, because it's going to occupy a place in your brain, even when you're not literally sitting there at the computer working on it. So for me, if I'm writing a book, a lot of the writing of the book takes place not at my computer. It's when I'm thinking about what a chapter might be about, how I'm going to tell that story. Like, I know I've got the information, I've got all the research done, but there's a million ways you could begin that chapter, or tell that story. And so a lot of that is done when I'm supposed to be doing something else, and
Right.
so I might be driving to work or sitting at the dinner table or watching a movie, but that's always going to be on your mind. And so you better really, really care about what it is that you're writing about. I think with your audience, if you're writing about something that's related to your career, you're already going to be an expert at it and you probably really care. So that may not be as much of an issue, but I think just knowing that it occupies your full being, whether you're literally writing it or not, is something to be aware of. For me, like in terms of your question about like sitting down with that blank page and how do you get started, organization and outlining has been very important to me. If you look behind me right now in my office, like you wouldn't necessarily think I'm organized. If you've been to our house, I'm not organized, but when I'm writing a book, like I really have to be. And so, um, and especially for me writing nonfiction, I think the research is by far the most important part of the writing. Even more important than writing the words is finding the information. Every single sentence, every part of a sentence has to come from some research that I've done.
Mm.
And so with my first book, Strong Inside, I spent 4 years just on the research before I wrote a single word for it. It took me 8 years to finish that book. Now I'm at a much faster pace where it's about a year and a half to 2 years for a book. But at least half of that is spent on research. Then taking all the research that I've compiled from interviews or, archival sources, I typically have binders full of documents, right? And then I'll create outlines from that, usually a short outline for the entire book. So maybe a sentence or two about what each chapter will be about, so I can see how the story is going to unfold. And then a much longer outline for each individual chapter that spells out, how I'm going to tell the story, where I'm pulling the sources of information from to write different scenes that will be in that chapter. And so sometimes those chapter outlines turn out to be pretty extensive, in some cases as long as the actual chapter is, but then it makes the writing a lot easier. And I tend to, sometimes people ask about like, how do you avoid writer's block? And one way that I do is by having a really good outline. And so I can just look at the outline and I know where I'm going next with the story.
I really wish I had talked to you before I started writing my book because I did it backwards, where I just put words on paper and that got me to a certain point. But then what happened is I got to a point where it was starting to, like I could tell it didn't flow. And so I
Okay.
had to go back and sort of like do an outline, And so I just wish I had done it
Yeah.
the way that
Well,
you're saying.
I
Um,
mean, but there's value to the way you did it too, because I think honestly, the biggest hurdle for people in writing a book is just doing it,
right,
And
right.
so actually getting words on the page, it helped you progress, even if you had to go back and revise it. Just getting started, I think, is what prevents most people from even
Yeah,
finishing, right? Like you
yeah,
have to get started. As simple as that sounds, people can come up with a million reasons why they're too busy or no one's going to buy it, or there's a million reasons to stop, to prevent yourself from getting going.
right.
And so the fact that you got started, even if you had to go back and change things, is a plus for
Um,
sure.
Thank you. And I kind of took some notes as you were talking because I felt like you said three really key points. The way that I heard the first thing that you said is you got to just say it out loud. Like, I'm writing a book.
Yes, yes.
So, like, admit it to yourself and
Yeah.
others.
Right.
If it's in you and you really want to do it, maybe that's the place. Just acknowledge that.
Hmm.
And then
There's
I'll,
some accountability that comes with that,
yeah,
just like anything else where accountability is important. Like if you've declared it, people are going to start asking you, how's it going? So
right.
it's helpful to have at least gotten started.
Yeah, it's like a little trick.
Yeah.
Um, I also heard you say, you know, that it really, I think I heard you sort of set an expectation for just how potentially consuming it can be and time consuming,
Hmm.
and to kind of just gear up for that. And
Hmm.
so it's just going to go better if you're writing about something that you really care about and that you're passionate in, because that'll be like natural drive. Um, which I,
Yes, it'll make the sacrifices feel more worth it also, and if something's going to be on your mind all the time, you might as well be really interested in that, and there's costs that come with it too, something else shouldn't always be on your mind, it feels like, and so yeah, I think that just in sense of personal satisfaction, fulfillment, your relationships, your job, like you better really care about what you're doing.
yeah, yes, yeah, because it is a sacrifice.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, and then just I think that was really, really helpful to hear how organized um you really are. Then that actually helps with the outline, and that actually makes the writing easier. That's kind of
Yeah,
your answer to writer's block.
right. And so it does require a little bit more time on the front end.
Yeah.
You could feel like you're writing a book more quickly without spending that organization time on the front. But I think in the end, it saves time. I think allowing yourself to envision the story as it unfolds creates a better book in the long run.
Mm,
And part of writing a book is your readers finishing it, so like if you've spent all this time thinking about it, preparing for it, researching it, writing it, you want them to actually keep turning the page. And so the flow of a book is really important, and I think outlining it helps you achieve a better flow. And one thing I'm always looking for are interesting, really compelling first chapter that makes you want to turn the page, and
mm.
then within each chapter, the beginning scene and the end of that chapter. Like it sounds like common sense, but like you got to draw people in and you have to make them want to turn the page to the next chapter. And so for me, rather than relying on sort of serendipity to figure it, well, I'll figure that out at the end, like as I'm writing it, like to plan on it, is really helpful.
I hear what you're saying, that it seems so obvious, but it's kind of profound, because as it's like, of course, because I can think of so many books that I've started and never finished.
Hmm.
There's a reason.
Yeah.
Oh, and then there are books that are just, it's even if they're maybe a little meatier or whatever, I finish them because there's something compelling. And so I really like what you're saying about
Mhm.
planning for that. Like, that is always in your mind, and that's part of your outline.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that means keeping your reader in mind, and writing as if you're also the reader of the book. What would keep you turning the page? And it involves sometimes taking a little bit of your ego out of it, because maybe you have done some significant research or you're an expert on a certain fact of life, or you feel like you have to fill the gaps between what is really interesting here and something that has happened later, but what's in between isn't compelling. But
Yeah.
for some reason, you feel like you have to fill that space. And
Yeah.
so that's where thinking like a reader really helps you. Uh, Whereas if you're thinking only of yourself and the work that you've done, um, you're going to put more in there than is necessary. It
Yeah.
is probably the best way for me to say it. And
No,
that's where people stop reading.
Yeah. Is it like this, Andrew? Because this is what I noticed in my own writing that, and these are the things that I cut out of my book is, and part of it was helpful. I had my sister read it and so she kind of helped me see some of this.
Mhm.
But when I felt sort of the need to prove myself in a way where I was trying to like, like almost like explain the concept, blah, 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 when I really could have done the same thing with a story.
Mhm.
Um, and that's so like,
Yeah, I
obviously,
think.
this is the book that I'm writing isn't an academic book, right? It has
Mhm.
academic concepts in it, but it's not an academic book. And so when I did that, I felt much better about the end product. But that's what I noticed is whenever I kind of went away from the flow or the something that would actually keep you engaged, it was
Mhm.
because I felt the need to prove something. Like, I
Yeah.
know this, and here's all the smart people that also say it, and
Yeah, yeah.
and
I
it
think you're right. Totally. I mean, people, I think you could strip that need to prove yourself away. If people are already reading the book, they already consider you an expert, so
right.
you don't have to go
Mhm.
to great lengths to prove yourself. Stories, everyone loves stories, and relying on stories is, I think, the most effective thing you can do. I know we write different types of books, but for me, I mean, it goes back to advice that you get in school of like show rather than tell, and so if you can show someone, make a point through a scene that they can envision, that is so much better than just like, dryly describing what happened. Paint a picture. And that's what goes, for me, that's what the research is all about, is finding the little details that allow me to write scenes like that you might expect in a movie. Like, what did it look like? What did it feel like? What did it smell like and sound like, to be in this moment at a certain time, and be able to write a scene that reads like, some people would say, like, reads like fiction, but and for writing nonfiction, that's where the research is required, and you never know where you're going to find a little nugget that makes a scene come alive, and feel really real. And so I would imagine that would be the same, in a book that a therapist might write. If you could describe a scene that someone was in, situation they were in, what it felt like at that moment, what were they thinking and saying and doing,
Right.
as opposed to more clinically writing about it, like, the readers would much prefer the story.
Yeah. Well, and I know you're like part of it, as you're saying this, I'm remembering all the trips, the work trips that you took
Mhm.
to actually visit some of these places of whoever you're writing about. And
Yes.
I can imagine that's part of your goal. Like for you to actually physically be in that place and talking to the characters, the people
Mhm.
who are still alive, that who you're writing about, like that's where you find these nuggets and it
Yes.
really, yeah.
Yeah, the travel, when it's possible, like, is a really important piece of it. My dad's an author also. He always has this motto of go there, like wherever there will be for a story. And yeah, for like purely observational reasons, you can describe a place if you better if you've seen it. Sometimes just being there and feeling it like gives you a sense of, that you wouldn't have if you're just looking at pictures online or something, or you might discover, while you're in this location, people that you hadn't planned on interviewing, but you're there, and you might meet certain people or be directed to find a person, or
Yeah.
an archive, of material that you had never even, known existed before. That's really important.
And it just makes it more authentic. It's just
Yes, absolutely. And I like to include a lot of pictures in my books too. As you mentioned at the beginning, they're for teens and adults. And I think, like, writing for younger readers, again, going back to that stamina of the reader, like wanting to keep them going. I know that for kids and even for adults, like if you see that coming up in 2 pages, it's actually just a picture, or half of that page is a photo. I like that when I'm reading. Like, oh, good. Like, that's a little bit of a break there, right? So for that purpose, I think pictures are important. But again, to allow them, to see the characters you're writing about or the places that you're writing about, I just think that's an important part of a book. And I like to include my pictures throughout the copy. You know, there's some books where there's a photo section in the middle, you know, or maybe two photo sections. I'm printing on a different type of paper, like in different points of the book. And that works for some books. For mine, I like them to have them fall in the story, like where that event actually occurred.
Yeah, it's part of your strategy, it sounds like it's part of you kind of
Yes.
keeping them engaged, and it fits with exactly where you're talking about that scene where they can see.
Right. Because I know when I pick up a book that has the photo section, that's usually the first part that I look at, you know, and so it kind of spoils the book in a way when you've seen photos of events or people that haven't really been introduced to you as you're reading it yet.
Yeah, yeah, and maybe it can even be distracting.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so this next question is just, I just keep hearing this and I just want to know what you think.
Hmm.
I keep hearing that there's no way you can make money off of a book unless you're super lucky, right? And it's kind of like there's 1% that makes it, and you should never write a book for money. And really, and then for therapists, this is what I've also heard, is that the I really should have put her outside.
It's fine.
But for therapists, you know, the goal is more about opening other doors, right? So if you've written a book, then maybe now you can get these speaking engagements and
Hmm.
that kind of thing. But I just like, I don't know. I've never done this. I have no idea. What is your take on that? And I think your community, you have more author friends, so you probably have more anecdotal um, experience in this. But how do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a good question because I mean you could answer it either way, I think, and be honest.
Yeah.
um, there are, especially with self-publishing as a tool now, there are probably, even as the publishing industry has gone through challenges recently, and I would agree that you shouldn't go into it with the goal in mind of that by writing a book, I'm going to make a lot of money.
Mhm.
It is a very small percentage of authors when you think of the totality of books that are published every year, whether through traditional publishers or self-publishing,
Yeah.
that make money. And I guess what we're talking about is, like, I had a friend who sent me their book proposal the other day, and they said their agent was hoping for a six-figure advance on their book. And
Well,
I said, wow, that would be incredible. Like, I've never gotten a six-figure advance on my books. And then he admitted, well, I don't think I really will either, but that's what they're shooting for, you know. Um, and so that's what I'm talking about on money. Like, it's a small percentage of authors that are getting that type of advance on their traditionally published books.
mhm.
But so why do people still do it? You know, like, you hope that you become one of those, that percent, right? Or you write the book understanding that this isn't going to be your primary job, but that it adds to your existence professionally, personally, in some way. You know, like, I totally agree. For a therapist to be able to say that they are also the author of X book adds to your credibility. It broadens your platform. It allows you to, I would imagine, and it's been true for me, to have speaking engagements, you know, and to get out there. Not only are you selling that book, but you're making people more aware of who you are, who might be interested in your next book also.
Right.
And so I think of my author life, and I have a regular job also, like most authors do, as something that is building, you know. And so with the goal of hopefully each book becomes more and more successful commercially, you know. Or, I mean, a big honest part of it is that you hope that your book sells enough that you get a chance to do another one. You know, it's one thing to want to write another book, but if you want to be published by a publisher, like, they have to want you, right?
Yeah.
And that requires selling a certain amount of books. So all of that goes around in my head. You know, I wish I was making a lot more money publishing these books. Doesn't pay the mortgage, you know, but it is a nice addition to our income. It's something that just personally I love doing. I feel like I'm fulfilling what I'm supposed to do more when I'm writing books than when I'm doing anything else
Yeah.
professionally, you know. Um, And for me, writing about stories about people that have been overlooked, like it makes me feel fulfilled to tell their stories, and writing for younger audiences and getting a chance to visit schools and try to inspire kids to read or to be interested, see that history is not boring, that it's important and it's exciting. Like there's personal fulfillment that comes from that beyond the paycheck.
Right.
But it's a constant battle because, like I say, you're spending so much time on it.
Yeah.
You're wondering, is it worth it? Or the costs to not being able to do certain things with your family, like worth it. And it requires, you're great friends with Allison, my wife, like she's a part of this, and she is supportive of it and allows me to do this, even though there's not always the financial reward and there's time away from the family, extra responsibility for her. So that's another aspect I think is really important for people to understand, is that you're getting the whole family involved in this, when you decide to write a book.
I really appreciate your honest answer. You really are so successful as an author. And to hear you say, and this is even that means and looks like, it kind of takes me back to how you were talking about your passion, that, there's got to be more than just, um, like the money, right? Like
Mhm.
that, there's a lot more to it. And there's buy-in with your whole family. And then I know that, you really are meant to do this and you love it and you're passionate about it. And it's not just the writing, but it's also the stories that you're getting. It's the message, right? It's
Right, right.
you.
Yeah. And I imagine that would be similar with therapists. Like, you're helping people by what you're writing, and so that mission is important for the world, whether you become rich
Right.
off your book or not.
Yeah.
But then, like, I know that in this category, there are books that break through, right? And that all of a sudden
Right.
everybody's buying, and so that's what you hope happens. But just realistically, you got to know that it's not the most likely result of what's going to happen.
Well, I think it would be, you know, it's better to have this perspective much more realistic and grounded, and also like sort of your why behind
Mhm.
writing, right?
Yeah.
And so to hear from you, who's kind of been through it and done it, and you still love it, and you're still passionate, and you still want to write, and it still feels worth it to you. Um,
Mhm. The other thing that this points to is the fact that when your book is written and it's published and printed, you're holding it in your hand, like your job's not done. In my first book, that's one thing that I didn't quite get yet, is
right.
that in some ways your job is just starting, because I mean, if you're self-published, of course, like you're responsible for selling that book in every way. But even if you have a publisher, a lot of the promotion, the marketing, the publicity related to that book falls back on the author. They have so many books they're publishing each year and such small publicity staffs. They really require the author to get involved. Not all authors like to do that. I mean, it shouldn't necessarily, in an ideal world, be the author's job to be selling their own book. Like, you write it and then there's someone else's job who,
Yeah.
responsible for selling it. But like, I spend a lot of time trying to line up speaking engagements, visiting schools, visiting bookstores, book festivals, pitching media, trying to do interviews, get the word out about my books. And so that's an aspect of it that is time consuming. Some might say that's preventing you from working on your next book, but I feel that it's all a part of it, and I actually don't mind it. I believe in my books and I want to get the word out about them. And so I just consider that part of the job.
That's a really good thing to keep in mind, right? Because I think, and I think what I'm hearing you say is maybe you didn't really know that in a way, like you hadn't lived it yet, but now that you
Right.
lived it, it's like, oh, you're just getting started when you think you're done and
Right.
another job to do. And yeah, depending on personality and what people are comfortable with, that might not be, you know, your favorite part, right? Like
Yeah,
if
yeah.
um I think that's good to sort of be realistic about that, and just to know that if you want to write and you want it to actually reach some, sense of an audience, you still have to work even after you're done writing, whether you're self-published or you have a publisher.
Yeah, I think for some people it seems almost like ugly or beneath them, or just a little salesy, like to be the one that's like hooking your own book, you know.
Nobody
um
likes that.
yeah, but I do think that in thinking about therapists, like it goes naturally with the speaking engagement, you know. It
Yeah.
doesn't feel wrong that this speaker who is sharing this really important information after their talk is going to be at this table over here signing copies of their book, you know, or that as part of an attendee at this conference where our keynote speaker is also an author, you will receive a copy of their book, you know. So maybe you work that out with the organizers of the conference ahead of time. That feels fine, you know. And so that's the type of thing that you should be thinking about as you use your book to expand your platform as a therapist.
I love that. And you're right. That's so normal. And I
Yeah,
never think, oh, they're really full of themselves.
right, right.
No, I'm like so excited to get a copy of the book and
Yeah, yeah.
sure,
And
like,
then when I mean, if you have the chance to sit at that table and sign copies of the book for the attendees and to build those relationships and, you know, to talk to your readers, like I think that's a valuable part of it. It's rewarding too when someone has already read your book and they come up and share something that was meaningful to them in what they read. Like, I mean, so there's a piece of this that like you deserve a little bit of reward for the work that you've done, you
yeah.
know. And for me, the biggest one is being out there in the world with the book and talking to people. I mean, there's a little bit of anxiety when you've written something and it's only existed in your head and on that your laptop or your computer for a length of time, maybe a couple of years, and all of a sudden it's out there in the world and there's people reacting to it, you know. And like you said, you don't like every book you've ever read, but that book meant a lot to who wrote it. You know, so like you have to have a little bit of thick skin to be prepared for that. You know, there'll be reviews, ideally like on Amazon or Goodreads, or you know, people just talking about it, and everyone has an opinion, right? And so, uh, you know, that goes along with it. But if you've done a good job and you hear people say this book meant something to me, you know, or you know, I love this book and I bought it, you know, for my dad for Father's Day or whatever, like, and it becomes a real part of other people's lives where it just used to be in your head, that's a really cool feeling.
How that, when you were describing that, I was feeling the anxiety. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with you know, because you're right, it's like your baby, right? Like it's been on your laptop for years, and then all of a sudden you're sort of trusting readers with it, and you're going
Mhm.
to get, their thoughts, and they're not thinking about, I mean, they're just writing a review. They don't know you necessarily.
Right.
Um, yeah, how do you have a thick skin? Like, how did you?
I don't really have thick skin, so it's not easy for me. The funny thing is most of the negative reviews on Amazon are like, it came 10 days late, you know, like it has nothing to do with the book. And they'll give it 2 stars because it was late arriving. I'm like, come on, that's not fair, you know.
Hey,
um, a lot of times people will even like let's say a review in a newspaper or a magazine or something, the reviewer almost feels obligated, even if they like the book, to say something like that they wish would have done better, you know, or this could have been included too, right? So now I just go into any review like expecting that there will be that little, but I wish they would have done this too, you know. And so I don't really worry about that. Uh I don't spend a lot of time obsessing over reviews. Like I don't look at my Goodreads pages for my books. I probably should spend more time like encouraging people to leave a review on Amazon, but I don't spend any time asking people to do that. Most of my books have been they've all been positively received by the book review industry that's out there, you know, which is smaller and smaller than it used to be. Um, and you mentioned, letting your sister read your book. I think that that's a preparation for reviews also. Like you're getting feedback from people before it's even been published, which always helps. My editor, Kelsey Murphy, is great, and she has helped in like broad ways, but also specific ways that have saved me from getting negative feedback books with the certain ways certain things have been written. So the reviews are part of the whole process, I guess is what I'm saying, not literally just when the book's been published, but ideally you've been getting feedback throughout the whole way.
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense. And it's, yeah, of course, if you have eyes on it, you know, like critical in a good way, eyes on it, um,
Hmm.
that's just going to save you so that it's, and then anything that there's always, you're right. Like
Yeah.
I think people who are more like what you're describing, the book industry, that it like makes them more credible if they say at least one thing that's a
Right,
little
right.
intense.
Yeah,
You just expect it.
you just expect it. But the other thing is, like, I had to get much better at receiving constructive criticism during the writing process. Like, you could have a great interview with Allison about this, like to the point where she would not even want to read stuff anymore because I would get so mad at her for like saying that I didn't explain something well, in the book. Like, you just don't understand, or
Yeah,
like you can't take it personally during the editing process, is what I would say.
yeah,
And when I talk to kids now about books and they ask about that, I'll say it's just like you're on the basketball team or you're on the baseball team or you're in theater and there's a coach or a director that's giving you advice about how to do something better. Do you resent that, or are you grateful for the help so that when it comes game time or show time, you're
right.
just better? And the people that are watching at that point don't know or care that maybe you couldn't do this perfectly the first time, but a coach or a director helped you, right?
Yeah,
Like, that's expected. That's part of what it means to do that. And
right.
so the more I've thought about that as an author,
Mm.
and understood that people who are offering feedback and edits aren't criticizing me, and that I should feel bad that I didn't get it right the first time, or that I needed help in the first place, right? But their feedback is making the final product, which is going to have my name on it, better. And so welcome as much of it as you can. Doesn't mean that you accept every single piece. Like, there might be things you hold on to,
Right.
but that feedback is valuable. It's not something you should take as personal criticism. It's helping you polish your product.
No, I can imagine, and I feel that for myself too, because it is, you know, whatever you're writing, especially if you're really passionate about it and and usually I think you're putting so much of yourself into it
Yes, that's
that
why it hurts.
it hurts. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like, it's almost like a part of you. Uh,
Yes.
However, you're right. It's, if the more that you can let go and just, right, like take it in. And I appreciate also what you're saying, that it's not that you have to take every single edit,
Hmm.
but you need to be open, because those, yeah, those are readers, right? And
Yeah. Yeah. And in the case of your editor, I mean, they're professionals at this,
right.
in the case of your friends and family who might be reading it, they're the typical reader. Like, so if something doesn't make sense to them, it's probably not going to make sense to other people too.
Yeah, yeah, yes. Oh gosh, so hard but so good. Okay, so I'm looking at time. We have just like a little over 10 minutes,
Okay.
and I want to make sure we talk about publishing. Um, this seems to be one of the biggest hurdles, and finding a publisher, especially if you're, you haven't written a book, you're a new author, and maybe you don't have this giant following, right? So you don't
Right.
have a huge social media following or anything like that, or an existing platform. Um, how do you do it? How did you
Yeah.
do it? Like, what's your advice on that?
I know, and I mean, it's such a catch 22. Like, how do you get started when you don't have anything to show? So for me, uh, it was a really frustrating experience with my first book. The typical way that you get a publishing deal is by finding an agent first. And so I would talk to agents about my idea. My first book is a biography of a man named Perry Wallace, who was the first Black basketball player in the SEC and played at Vanderbilt in the late 60s. And so this was going to be a biography, a civil rights story, sports story that uses basketball to talk about history. Um, and the agents would say, well, there's three things that sell books, and at best you're going to have one of them. And they meant sell biographies. They said the name recognition of the subject, right? So if you're writing about president, or a famous movie star, people have heard of that person. No one had heard really of Perry Wallace. He played basketball in the Nashville in 1960s. The second thing they said was the name recognition of the author, which as a first-time author, you really don't have any, right? And so they said, no one's ever heard of Perry, no one's ever heard of you. So all you're going to have at best is the third thing, which is the quality of the story itself, which to me was like, well, that should be all that matters, like, is this going to be a good book or not, right?
Yeah.
But so they weren't interested in me, and so I would approach agents and be turned down. Then I started to pitch publishers myself, which is a really hard way to do it, and I was getting basically the same feedback when I got any feedback at all, right? And so I just decided that this was a project that I wanted to do regardless, and I would spend 8 years researching and writing this book without knowing that it was going to be published, which I don't really recommend, but that's what I wanted to do. And this was from 2006 to 2014. So it was really before or just at the beginning of when self-publishing became a much more credible thing to do. So I was sort of had that in the back of my mind. It wasn't really what I wanted to do as a plan B, but I figured by the end, like if that's what I had to do, that's what I was going to do. I was going to write this book anyway. And then it turned out to just be personal connections. So a friend of mine named Jeff McDonald is at that time he was the women's tennis coach at Vanderbilt. And one of the things he did when it wasn't tennis season is he taught lessons to people in Nashville. And one of the people he was teaching lessons to happened to be the editor at Vanderbilt University Press. And he told him, did you know that Andrew is writing this book on a former Vanderbilt basketball player? It takes place in the civil rights era. And the editor said, no, but I'd like to see it. And so that's how it literally happened, is that by that point, I was almost done writing the book. A friend of a friend said they'd like to see it. And so I just, delivered my thumb drive, and he read the manuscript and liked it. And that book got published. And then all of a sudden, I started to hear from agents that said, I heard you didn't have an agent on that book. I'd like to represent you on your next book. Publishers became interested because there was a track record, so now I do have a literary agent. My subsequent books have all been published by Penguin Random House. So I've gone from a university press to a more, mainstream traditional press in New York. And I don't think that that's necessarily typical, but some aspects of it are, like the rejection at the beginning.
That's what I'm most impressed by.
Yeah.
Honestly, like you were so persistent and you didn't give up and you didn't stop writing. I mean, I really admire that.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm glad I didn't give up. But it goes to that catch-22 aspect of it also, like where things get easier once you've done it. But like, how do you do it the first time?
Yeah.
I think that you do have to have some, and this will come naturally to the therapist because you're a subject matter expert.
Mhm.
That matters, right? Some people want to write a book and they're brand new to the subject even, right? So I had been a sports journalist before, had a reputation at Vanderbilt from having gone to school here and working here. So I had some things that were showing that I was the right person to write this book. That's
Right.
one thing you have to prove, is like, why are you the right person to write this book? Publishers will want to know that. But before you write a book, like, have you written articles for journals, or for other magazines, publications? Have you been a speaker at certain events where you can demonstrate that you know what you're talking about and that people have shown that they want to hear what you have to say? So looking for those building blocks before you write a book is one way to get that opportunity to write a book. You don't have to love doing social media, but it's helpful if you can say that you have a certain following, already, or that you have speaking engagements lined up already. That publishers will want to know, how are you going to help sell this book, and if you can show those ways, that's helpful. Another thing they'll want to know is how is your book similar to other books that have sold well, so they can imagine, oh, this book's going to kind of be like this other one that, that did really well last year. At the same time, they want to know, how is it different than any book that's ever been published before? So if they can say, we get it, it's kind of like this book, but it's on this topic, or it had never really been addressed this way, that's something new for the market, also that will matter to them. And so really thinking about your book in those terms will help you land an agent, and ultimately help you help that agent find a deal for you. The other thing I'd say is self-publishing is much more credible now than it's ever been before. It's a totally fine route to go. It's much quicker, would be an advantage that some people would see, and that you're not spending time finding an agent. You're not spending time for that agent finding the publisher. Even once you get the deal, they'll probably expect it from you in a year, maybe, right? That's when your final draft is due. Then there's the editing process. It's usually 9 months after the book is done in your mind before it actually hits the shelves. So it's like, if you had an idea now that's sold, it's probably going to be at least a year and a half, 2 years before it's out. If you self-publish, it could be out the day you finish writing, and maybe that's in 6 months from now. So those are the pros and cons that you have to weigh. And also, if you feel like most of your book sales are going to come from these speaking engagements at the table, right after the deal, then it really doesn't matter that much whether it's been traditionally published or self-published, other than I'd still think there's an extra layer of credibility that comes from having a published book as opposed to a self-published. That Penguin or any of the other publishers out there, Simon & Schuster, felt like that was good enough to put their name on it.
Right.
I still think that carries some weight.
Yeah, I agree. I love, you just gave like so many good tips on building your own runway toward publishing. And so that was really, really helpful. I was taking notes as you were talking. Okay. 2 more questions. One is kind of just like a broad catch-all, right? And then I want people to be able to find you. And so we're going to talk about like how to find you and your books. Okay. But if you could talk to the younger you, right? If you could go back to you before you'd written your first book, what do you wish you would have known, or what would you say to younger?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say is to get started earlier. I've really enjoyed writing books. Like I say, I feel like it's what I'm good at, what I'm meant to do. For me, it's fun. Every aspect of it is fun. I love doing the research. I don't love doing the writing, but I like it, and then I love having the books out and being able to talk about them, and travel to interesting places, doing the research, or going to book festivals. Last night, a play premiered that was based on a book that I wrote. That's been a great life experience to be a part of. And so I didn't get started researching my first book till I was 36. It didn't come out till I was 44, and so I wish that I had started earlier. And so I think that the message to your audience then would be, like, kind of like we said at the beginning, like, just get started, and don't put it off any longer. If this is something you want to do it now, and no more excuses, just do it.
Yeah, I love that. You're right. Just do it. Okay, so how can people find you? And I'll put this in the show notes and in the email that I send to our audience, but what's the best way to find you?
The simplest way is I have a website, andrewmaraniss.com. I'm on Twitter a lot, which is True Blue 24 with no E's, TRUBLU 24. Instagram at my first initial A, last name Maraniss, so A Maraniss. Those are all the ways to find me. If you don't mind, I would like to say what all my books are about. So the first one is
Please
Strong
do.
Inside on Perry Wallace, this incredible civil rights and basketball figure. Second book is Games of Deception, which is a story of the first U.S. men's Olympic basketball team at the 1936 Olympics in Nazi Germany. So that uses basketball to talk about fascism and anti-Semitism. Third book is called Singled Out. It's a biography of Glenn Burke, who was the first openly gay Major League Baseball player, and also the inventor of the high five. That book uses baseball to talk about homophobia. Most recent book is called Inaugural Ballers. It's the story of the first U.S. women's Olympic basketball team, which played at the 1976 Olympics in Montreal. So it's basketball and feminism. I said 5 books at the beginning because there's 2 versions of Strong Inside, an adult edition and a middle school version. I have a new series coming out next year called Beyond the Game, which will be for much younger kids, first graders, on athletes that have done good for the world outside of their sport. There'll be at least 4 books in that series. The first 2 are on basketball players Maya Moore and LeBron James. Third book is on football player Pat Tillman, and the 4th is still to be written. And then I'm starting a series for Scholastic of fiction for young first, second graders, early chapter books about a group of neighborhood friends who play sports and learn lessons through that. So I feel like I'm kind of like Benjamin Button or something. Like I started with the old book for adults, and now I'm writing for like first graders, going backwards in time. But having kids, I think it just has really shown me like how much certain kids love reading, how much other kids maybe aren't reading, but if they had the right book for them, they would be. And so that's what feels most meaningful to me right now.
I love hearing you just list them, because as you list them, I can remember, because, we've been to all of your book signings, we've been to everything, and we've had you over for dinner and we've asked, okay, like, what are you writing now? And like, we've heard you talk about just I'm thinking about, like, before it was
Yeah.
you even researching. And it's just such a privilege to just witness it all. And I'm so proud of you. And Strong Inside is still my personal favorite.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean,
I don't
it's
know.
my
Maybe
first baby, so
it's
me too.
nostalgic. It was like such a big, it was such a long time coming. Like, you worked so
Mhm.
hard on that book, and it was like, I remember the event, I guess it was at Vanderbilt. Right? Do you remember this?
Well, yeah, when it first came out, there was one at the downtown library, and then there was one at Vanderbilt those first couple of days. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And it just felt so
And at Parnassus.
special. Anyway,
Mhm.
so yeah, I'm proud of you. I think you're doing what you're meant to do.
Well, I
And
feel the same way about you, Kelly. So, uh, yeah, totally
thank you
mutual.
so much. Yeah, and thank you for just taking your time out to talk to me, and then for everybody who's listening. I know that, like, you've been very encouraging, and I think the takeaway is, yes, it's like hard, wonderful work. And if you've been saying you want to write a book, and that was, I said it for years, and I'm just, I'm doing it now, and I'm so glad that I'm doing it, but I'm now even more motivated to finish after talking
Mhm.
to you. So for those listening, just do it. No more
I
excuses.
mean, maybe that sounds like a trite shoe commercial, but like I think it's the thing to really, if you're thinking about it at all, like you should do it. I mean, whether you get published by a publisher or you self-publish, and self-publishing your first book doesn't mean that's the way you're going to go with every book.
Right.
And I know there are examples of authors that have self-published and then gotten that same book, published by a traditional publisher. So it's a totally legit way to go, and increasingly so.
Yeah, yeah. There's options, and then the other thing, and I promise I'll let you go, but the other thing is, I was just thinking about how persistent you were. And and I was thinking, you were talking about it, you were telling people, and that's the only reason that that connection even happened, to get to you.
Right. That's true.
I
Yeah,
was
that tennis coach wouldn't have known. Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
talk about it, tell people what you're doing, let people be a part of it.
Hmm.
You never know who knows somebody and all of that.
Yeah. Oh, one other thing I just thought of on the pros of self-publishing also is it eliminates a lot of barriers to entry, and maybe that sounds obvious too, but for publishing industry hasn't had a great track record of publishing diverse authors over the years, and so whose voices were allowed to be told, whose stories were allowed to be told. Would agents, was there an old boys network among agents even, and types of authors they were looking for? And so I think that publishing has gotten better on that front, but self-publishing is available to anybody. It doesn't matter who you are, what you look like, or your religion, or anything, what connections you do or don't have, you
Yeah,
can self-publish. And so that's another positive thing about it that I think is important to say.
yeah, no, I appreciate that, and it's good to hear that it's changed, that it is, more accepted, um like maybe
Hmm.
almost as credible, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, we keep going here, but like in the past in self-publishing, you had to like commit to printing a certain number of books. And there were examples of authors like with their garages full of all these books that they couldn't sell. And it's basically print on demand now, so that like you're not dealing with that either. I mean, the book is printed when somebody buys it online. And then you buy a certain amount to take to your events, but you're not really on the hook for a huge quantity of books that you may or may not sell.
Yeah, yeah. So it's more efficient and it's less risk, right?
Right. Yes.
I love that. Okay.
I'll
Okay.
stop.
Now
Okay.
we're gonna call it. Thank you,
All
thank
right.
you, thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Same.